Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm Ben Griffith, and this is the Ben Griffith Breakdown. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about the Alex Pretti shooting. I am not going to discuss any of the things that kind of led up to the shooting because it doesn't really factor in what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about today is the legality of this shooting, where it's heading from that standpoint, and why I think it's headed in that direction. So when I'm talking to people about this, I keep saying that I do not have nearly enough evidence from what I've seen to say if this was a quote unquote good shoot. And when I say a good shoot, I mean that tactically, right? When the officer fired, was there a gun in the guy's hand? Was there a perceived threat? Was the gun already gone from the scene when they fired? And they all factor into a good shoot or a bad shoot tactically, right? Now, this is what's really going to piss some people off. But everyone watching needs to understand this simple fact. A shooting that is tactically a bad shoot can still be a legal shoot, right? And I know that's hard for people to wrap their head around, but it's true. And I'm going to go through it and talk it through, but let me explain that I do not believe that these officers will be found guilty of murder or anything else because, and it's by no means because of the competency of these agents. I believe that they made some mistakes here and things were done wrong. But it's rather because the law and the perception of officers' actions in the courts in these situations, as well as qualified immunity. So we'll get into it. Actually, before we get into it, let me talk about qualified immunity for a second, because I'm going to be referencing it as we go through. So qualified immunity is basically exactly what it sounds like. Law enforcement officers are immune from prosecution with the qualifying factor that the thing that they did was there was no gray area or misconceptions, right? And that whatever right they violated had to have been clearly established in that moment. And again, there was no gray area or way that it could have been misconstrued in the moment. But what it really means is that officers who are in a situation where somebody's approaching them with an axe, what appears to be an axe in the moment, they don't have to determine whether that is definitely an axe, as long as they have a objectively reasonable threat to their life. And they don't have to make a split-second decision between losing their life or going to prison, right? And because of qualified immunity, law enforcement officers, whether you agree with it or not, are allowed to make mistakes, and that factors in heavily into the case law surrounding this incident, right? So let's walk through it and kind of what happened here. So at some point during this altercation, you can hear in a couple of the videos, police officers yelling out, he's got a gun, or there's a gun, something about there's a gun, right? And clearly calling it out to the other officers. And at that point, we can't really see where Alex Pretti's hands are. We can't see what the officers are saying. We can't really hear what's being communicated between the officers, what the officers are communicating to Alex Pretti. And that is all key pieces of evidence that I hope come out in some sort of body cam if they end up releasing that, and I hope they do. But first, let's go through this defensive narrative that people are saying, where they're saying he never even drew his weapon. Why that falls completely flat as a narrative, and why even a holstered weapon creates a threat and changes the situation dramatically. So I want to go through what happens when a firearm is discovered during a physical altercation with police. As soon as that firearm is discovered, once they see that gun, the threat assessment changes immediately. And you can ask any law enforcement out there, and they will agree with it. And that becomes potentially lethal for these officers. So that doesn't mean that this person intends harm. What it means is that the capacity for lethal harm to these officers is now present and changes the dynamic again completely. The reaction window for police officers shrinks considerably. Now, every single movement that was innocuous 2 seconds ago, reaching towards your pocket, reaching towards your waistband, holding an object in your hand, turning your body a certain way, is now interpreted as a risk or threat indicator, I guess you could say. And guys, this is key. And a lot of people don't understand this, but it needs to be understood. Once a weapon is identified, positively identified, the use of force thresholds drop instantly and they drop dramatically, right? The presence of a firearm drastically accelerates the point at which deadly force becomes legally permissible. And I want to say that again. The presence of a firearm drastically accelerates the point at which deadly force becomes legally permissible. That right there is probably the biggest reason why he never even took his gun out of the holster is a BS argument. And the reason for that is that as soon as they see that gun, the threat of lethality is no longer theoretical; it is tangible at that moment. That's why that use of force threshold drops so dramatically, so quickly, right? And also in that moment, misinterpretation risks skyrocket. The threshold for mistakes goes through the roof, right? So during a chaotic, shouting, a physical struggle, the chance that an object looks like a weapon, the chance that somebody reaching again looks like they're trying to pull something out. And in addition to that, it's been proven over and over again that an officer that experiences a biological, experiences a biological change like cognitive tunneling and auditory exclusion once a potentially lethal situation arises. Narrows their field of vision. They're not hearing everything they should be hearing. These are involuntary reactions that they're dealing with on top of everything else. An example of that, I firmly believe that the majority of the officers who were in that situation did not know that the gun had been removed from the situation. I don't know if that one officer never called it out or he called it out and they didn't hear it. But again, these are the kind of things that happen in those types of situations. And it was only 1 or 2 seconds from the time they took that gun out to the time that first gun was fired, and a lot of things went wrong. But again, this comes from, stress of a situation, misinterpretations that start happening. And again, these involuntary reactions that the officers are having in the moment. And I'm not trying to use them as excuses. These are facts that have been documented in these situations for years. So another thing that people don't understand is that when you have a standard altercation with the police, he catches you, I don't know, breaking windows or whatever, right? That officer in that moment has some de-escalation obligation at that moment, right? They'll tell you to stop resisting, try to get you to calm down, de-escalate the situation. Once a gun is discovered in a physical altercation, the obligation of de-escalation then falls 100% to the person with the gun. In that moment, the cops have no more obligation to de-escalate that situation in any way, shape, or form once that weapon comes out. And that's another thing that I think people don't fully understand. And another reason why this whole, he never even took his gun out thing kind of, falls to the wayside. So the presence of a firearm does not mean that you deserve to be harmed, but it fundamentally changes how police are trained to, perceive, interpret, and react to your actions. And from that moment on, every single movement that you make is evaluated through a lethal threat lens of these officers. And the encounter becomes far less forgiving of mistakes and, quite frankly, increases the possibility of mistakes in that moment. So, again, this narrative of, he never took his gun out, it doesn't hold water as far as a threat assessment goes for all the reasons that we just talked about. On top of all of that, there is piles and piles of case law that support this. So Graham versus Connor was kind of the baseline for this. And, judges always say in these cases that there's objective reasonableness from the perspective of the officer, without hindsight in a tense situation, blah, blah, blah. But Graham versus Connor said specifically if a reasonable officer could believe that the object was a gun in that moment, the force can be constitutional even if the object was not a gun. So, and that goes to a lot of other cases as well, where if you were, they thought there was a gun and you were reaching, they're still covered by qualified immunity, as long as they have a reasonable belief that you are posing a lethal threat to that officer. Tennessee versus Garner, another kind of landmark case. In this case has caused courts consistently to rule that a reasonable belief that someone is armed satisfies that standard of qualified immunity, even if the belief turns out to be wrong. Thompson versus Hubbard in 2001, an officer shot a guy who brought up a cell phone and he thought it was a gun. He shot the guy. Court ruled that that shooting was objectively reasonable and granted the officer qualified immunity. Anderson versus Russell in 2001. Suspect, was told to put his hands in the air, reached into his waistband. Officer shot him. The object in his waistband turned out to be a Walkman. The court still upheld that the shooting was constitutional, granted the officer qualified immunity. So all of these cases lead to the same overall conclusion. In a split second, if an officer has multiple factors that could reasonably lead him to believe that a deadly threat existed, that is all that qualified immunity requires. So in this situation, if these officers truthfully believe that he still had the gun and they didn't realize the gun had been taken away, whether it was bad communication or otherwise, unfortunately, that is all that is required by law for them to have qualified immunity. So what looks like a cold-blooded murder when slowed down frame by frame is not evaluated by courts like that. They look at it in real-time perception, not in hindsight, and not in slow-mo videos. So, and the fact that Alex Pretti actually had a gun on him, it weighs heavily, heavily into that analysis. And again, lowers the threshold for lethal action by the police considerably. So once again, I am not saying that this was tactically correct, because it seems like they shot him after the gun was gone. And I don't know what was happening in there. Again, we have to wait for more evidence to come out. What I'm saying is that under current law, it was likely legal based on the perception of the officers at the time, especially because there was a gun. There was actually physically a gun there. And that's why I believe that all of these officers will almost certainly not be charged. And if they are charged, they will not be convicted. And as angry as that makes a lot of you, that's how the law is written, to protect officers from, again, having to put themselves in a situation where their options are their life or a prison sentence, which is why they put qualified immunity in place back in the 60s. And even though I've spelled this out, piece by piece, there's still going to be people who respond to this video with, F that, they murdered him, and he never even took his gun out, and you can't shoot someone with no gun, and they already had the gun. Even though those are all tactical arguments and not legal arguments. And I can't stress this enough. Police officers can make terrible tactical decisions and still be legally within the bounds of qualified immunity. And if you don't get that, then there's no other way for me to explain it to you. So again, I don't think that this is going to lead to charges. And because of that, I think that it's just going to add to more buildings being burned in Minneapolis, because law and logic is not enough for people who are rationalizing this situation based purely on emotion and Facebook memes, right? So, guys, I'll leave it there, but and I'm sure there's going to be some comments on this one. But again, leave your questions and comments in the comment section, and I will get to them as I can. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you next time.